All right. So, with me in the studio today, I have with me one of the most amazing mastering engineers, Arizona's own David Shirk. Welcome, David.
Thanks, man.
David, how do you want
I
to
usually,
address
I
you?
usually Dave.
Dave?
David seems too formal.
So, how did I meet Dave? I met Dave as a result of me wanting to master one of my CDs. I wanted to mass produce it. So, I approached this guy who had an advert online. Back in those days, you would rely on ads. There wasn't too much social media, so you actually have to kind of search to find what you wanted. And I found this company. I can't remember what the company was called, but I believe Andy was one of the people at the helm, because when I came into the establishment, I met him, and he said, "Yeah," and he said, "If you want to get this thing mass produced, have you mastered it?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you might want to talk to Dave."
So I was right in the next
Yeah.
location there. So yeah,
Then
that was
it.
Tempe tape and disc.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So were you part of that, or was that?
Yeah. Andy and I were partners for a long time. We initially got that building in Geneva Drive in Tempe, and so I kind of had the idea when I started. I wanted to have manufacturing as part of what I do. Since I worked at a CD plant for almost 6 years in the East Coast, I had all these connections in the CD manufacturing world. So I wanted to have it be kind of like a turnkey thing, where somebody could come in and work with me, and then we have everything else done. And then we added a graphics guy as well. The first graphics guy we had for maybe, I want to say like a year and a half or something, his name was Scott Smiley. And then he went out, and that front office up there, I had rented to a couple of different people over the years, 2 different record labels. One was Stu Baker, Stu Hasis. Unfortunately, he just passed away recently, but he had Hayden's Ferry Records out of there for a while. But eventually we got Tony Amato, the graphics guy. There was Amato Image Design. So we had kind of a turnkey situation. So people would come in to master with me, and most of our work came from word of mouth and just, I was in the business for a long time. Andy was in the business for tape duplication for a long time. But I had a lot of connections with record labels and, just various studios across the country, so because I came from the East Coast, I had connections all up and down the East Coast and Chicago and Florida and stuff like that. And so when I moved out to Arizona to work for another studio in town, when I left him and started my place, I still had all those connections. So, and then I developed more when I was here. So people would come in and work for me, and then I'd just have the conversation with them, say, "Hey, where are you manufacturing at?" And they'd say, "Well, we're going to go to disc makers or, whatever." And then say, "Well, we're a brokering office. We're not a plant, obviously, but I can give you a price on that." And, and then we'd also have the conversation about graphics, introduce them to Tony, and then we go from there. So, and ultimately, I would always tell people, you can have Steely Dan on the inside of the jacket, but if the artwork looks horrible, no one's going to want to buy it. Whereas you can have a horrible record on the inside, and if you have great artwork, people will want to buy it. So, we started getting into digipacks, all these different kind of custom packaging, and that was fun too, kind of see where the graphics and the artwork went from just jewel boxes on, through the process. So, and it became more eco-friendly as it went on, So, but those options were pretty cool. So ultimately, I talk to people and say, "Who's doing your artwork?" And they say, "Well, my uncle or whatever's doing it." And I pull out some of the stuff that Tony did and say, "Here's what we've done." They'd be like, "Oh, wow, that looks really great." And we partnered with a pro photographer. People had the budget. His name's Mike Woodall, local guy who's a phenomenal photographer.
Really?
So yeah, it became like a turnkey thing out of that one location at 2519 West Geneva Drive. So yeah.
So Tempe tape and disc, Sonorous mastering. What gave you the impression to give it that name, Sonorous?
Boy, you're going way back there. That's testing the batteries. I eventually I took over the CD manufacturing side of it, and for both companies, I remember getting a name is hard, as you know, because everything you can think of is taken, and all those little in between things. That's why so many companies these days are like an amalgam of some words put together, or some crazy spelling of whatever with some Z's where S's should be or whatever. So I was looking up the Sonoran Desert, and then I kind of transferred into the word Sonorous, which is sonorous, and then the meaning of that is full and rich in sound.
Wow.
And so it sounds kind of like the Sonoran Desert, but it had a meaning that connected to audio and, high fidelity per se. So that's kind of why I found that name. And I wasn't in love with the word per se. I thought it was a word that people could wrestle with a little bit. But I got this graphic artist. It wasn't Scott, our original guy. It was another guy. His name was Dave. I can't think of his last name. I found him through my girlfriend at the time in 1996. And he did this logo for me. And it looks an awful lot like, it almost looks like AT&T stole my logo. Because he did like this globe thing with an S on it. And when he did it, I was like, I dig that. And then later AT&T came out with theirs. They didn't have it then at the time. And so, but anyway, once he did the logo, I locked in. I really liked it. What he did with the look of it, I was like, I'm down. I got it. So that's how I got that name.
It's clever play on words.
Yeah.
So this was my very last work that you mastered. It's called Inventors of Our Time. And what happened shortly after, like 2014, 2015? What happened after that time period that just made you decide this is it? How bad was it?
Pretty bad. Yeah, quite bad. Yeah. So, I mean, when we started the studio in June, I believe it was, of 97. I mean, at the time, I moved out here in January 1995. And when I moved here, like the whole scene in Arizona was explosive. It was really cool.
Wow.
I mean, it was almost like kind of like the second coming of like Seattle per se, without the grunge aspect. There was all these bands doing well. There was tons of clubs. Like you could go down to Mill Avenue, like on certainly all through the weekend, most weeknights, and it was just packed with people. Just like a party all the time. And there was tons of clubs back then. Like Electric Ballroom. Like when I first moved here and I was working for the other studio I was in North Phoenix. I didn't really know about Tempe or where ASU was or any of that stuff. I was just an idiot. And the first time, and I remember saying to the guy who owned the studio, I come out here to work for another mastering studio who's now closed as well. And when I was first talking to them, I'm like, where is like the Broadway here? Where's the scene? Because we were like in this kind of remote area, and there was really nothing up there. And they're like, well, I don't know, like they didn't really, they didn't care too much, I think. So I came down to Mill Avenue the first time, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is the place, right? But like Gibson's was open and the Electric Ballroom. Every band I worked with up there, I was like, where are you guys playing? And they're like, oh, we're playing Electric Ballroom, CD release party, come out, check it out. First time I went into it, I was like, this place is awesome. It was real big, and they had that, like the front area where you could get away from the music, pool tables. It was just a cool place. I liked it. And I actually came from Eastern Pennsylvania. I moved out to here, and a lot of the places in Philly were closing at the time. So that whole scene was kind of drying up in 95, whereas out here it was booming, So when I moved here, there was tons and tons of music going on. And when I started the studio in 97, I was doing sessions like every day. So it was packed, just really busy. But as with any business, and in life, you don't really know what's going to happen down the road. You can kind of plan, but you certainly don't know. And, Napster was like the first big ripple that we had. Like once and 9/11 was also a big ripple, obviously, for the whole country. But a lot of businesses, like independent businesses that are working with independent people, when something like 9/11 happens, people kind of clamp down or freaked out. They don't really know what's going to happen. And, so that was a ripple in business, but that recovered. And then Napster as well was like a big ripple. And once that started happening, things started to change, And then I'd say the next thing that started to affect everybody is Pro Tools. We talked about this the other day. When Pro Tools came out, I remember thinking, okay. And the thing they did when they first came out that was smart, is they were interfacing with a lot of other companies to kind of bring their product or their apps or their sound or whatever in their system. Instead of like all the other companies that were like, this is ours, we're exclusive, get away from us, Like I used the Sonic Solution system. That was really, really expensive. I paid like 40 grand for my Sonic system, which was all the parts were like, they were like spec'd out by them. Like the external hard drives were stuff they had to get. Like the CD burner was one, was made by Sony, but it was one that they spec'd. So everything they got. And like, I didn't have a printer hooked up to it. I didn't have the internet hooked up to it. It was a Power Mac. I forget the model anymore, but it was a big old giant heavy tower, And I never did anything with it except that. It was just my DAW. There was nothing external. So that thing looked like a rock forever. It was just great, man. It was a great system. So, but Pro Tools was more like, let's get everybody else involved in our system. Once that started happening and once it started to sound good, I was like, okay, so it's going to go more to like home recorders per se. And so to get back to your question, that's sort of what happened, is like more and more people as time went on started using, DAWs that you could get for cheap, software plugins, et cetera, even outboard pieces that you can get for cheap, doing it at home, doing it in basements, garages, et cetera, and not going to pro audio services per se. So I went from I could have done 2 sessions a day for the first 10 years of my business. I was packed all the time. So, I mean, I used to book time out and just to, get a break, and there's times when I had angry clients because I was trying to juggle too much stuff, and I remember a good friend of mine in Tucson, Rich Hopkins, who was in the Luminarios and all these big bands from down there. I had a couple conversations with him where he wanted to get stuff done. I just couldn't get to it. It was, I had too much work. So it went from that to really getting people coming in. It was like maybe, went from a couple sessions a week down, dwindled down to that. And then eventually it was just even less. So yeah, it got tough, so, but you don't know what's going to happen in life, and you kind of sometimes have to reinvent, and it was, getting out of it was really hard. It was like an extraordinarily difficult thing, so, I was not really mentally prepared for it. I didn't want it to happen, and but yeah, it wasn't really sustainable at a certain point. And now these days, most people that are doing stuff, they do it at home.
Yeah.
They're using plugins, cheaper systems, and they don't really know what it's like. And most people weren't recording with live people anymore. So the vast majority of my career was spent working on projects that were done with live humans. So so I feel fortunate for that. So I had a great time doing it. It's 30 years almost, and
Wow.
And I loved it. It was really fun.
Wow. I mean, when I picked this up today.
And by the way, thanks for depressing me. So, hey, thanks, man. See,
it's therapy. I'll be the therapist for the day. Honestly, when I picked this up, and I there's this nostalgia that it just saddens you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was somewhat sad when I picked this up.
Yeah.
Happy at the same time that I got it out.
You have a doubt, where you were at that time, and the efforts you put forth. Yeah, no doubt.
It's more than the music; it's the experience.
Sure.
So when Pro Tools and such came out, there was a whole lot of mastering buzz, though, and eventually mastering plugins started surfacing. So it's funny that you were able to perceive that shift even before the mastering plugins appeared.
Well, I think one of the things we talked about is Tony, the graphics guy. He was on every word of Steve Jobs. He would hang on his every word. He loved him. He lived for him. He worshipped him. Everything that Mac came out with that was new, he had it instantaneously. And I think a lot of graphics people are kind of like that. They want that current thing to get the most speed, whatever. I'm kind of in my world, in my studio, my favorite things were hand-built custom analog pieces. I like old school, I like to turn a knob, I like to have a device that's there. I grew up as a guitar player, so I really if I encountered a big bag of money somewhere, I would just buy more analog pieces because I like that stuff, so compressors, EQs, limiters, stuff like that. But he was really into everything that Steve Jobs did, and at the time he had just gotten the new G3, which is the new computer. This is many, many years ago. Most of your kid viewers would not even know what that is, right? And he got this G3, and we were going to lunch one day. I went up into his office, and he's like, "Check this out." And I go, "What is that?" He's playing me. He's like, "Listen to this." And I go, he's playing some sounds, and he plays me some drum sound, snare sound or something. And I'm like, "What is this?" And he's like, "This is a thing called GarageBand." And this is the first iteration of that. And he's like, I go, how much you pay for that? He goes, it came on the computer free. And I'm like, I just said, we're done. It's done. I go, because kids are going to start using this, and they're not going to want to go into any studios and work with people because, and we're talking many, many years ago, a long time ago. So,
it's crazy how you're able to pick up that.
Yeah, well, I just kind of saw it's going to be cheaper and more, home contained kind of thing. But even back then, the first version of it, it sounded pretty good. I remember asking him to play the B3 sound, and it sounded pretty darn good. Now, again, it's not going to sound anywhere close to what an actual B3 is. We talked about this the other day. When you open up a B3 and you see wires and tubes and stuff like that, you're not going to, do that digitally. But even back then, it sounded pretty good. So, so that's kind of that's sort of the start of the end as far as I'm concerned. So, and it was a gradual grinding down. So
do you see people they were just doing stuff in the bedroom and not caring about mastering at all? Because what filled that mastering void from the rise of the Pro Tools and the GarageBand?
There's still people doing mastering. There's no doubt about that. There's still pros doing mastering, But my client base I started, many, many, many years ago, 1989, and my client base was getting to the point where all the record labels were being gobbled up or dissolved. My clients were dying, literally. It was they were coming to the end, not doing projects anymore kind of thing, moving away, dealing with older parents, so it wasn't the priority of making music with humans anymore.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of a twofold answer. There are still pros doing mastering, like Bob Ludwig just retired, so it's like a big deal. I mean, he's like one of the gods of this thing, you know. And so there's still guys. There's a guy here in just like, let's see, I guess he has like a Chandler address, I think. He's got a great studio. It's a home studio. He's got great gear, great ears. He's a really good guy. His name's Nathan James. He's got a good studio down there. And I've known him for a long time. And I refer him to people call me and stuff like that. So there's people doing that. But, you know, I don't know what his workload is. I have no idea. I don't, it's his business, you know. So, but and I know he gets a lot more stuff like online than I ever did. I never really did that. I didn't get stuff delivered to me via internet. I have people coming in always, you know. So, and when I first started, it was a lot of tape. You know, it was 1/4.5 inch analog tape, which I loved.
Good old days.
Yeah,
Good old
it
days.
was fun, really fun, you know.
Yeah.
And then so there's still guys doing it, just far less of them doing it, you know. And there's far kind of less, I think, people who are, you know, younger generation people who are doing records at home who are saying, I want to go spend $1,000 mastering this record. They may not have the budget, they may not understand it, you know, they may have a bunch of plugins themselves and do it on their own, you know. So I mean, I don't exactly know what's happening these days because I'm out of it, but again, I mean, I know for me, the grinding part was more people doing it at home.
Gotcha.
They got plugins, they got a cheap. I got this $250 piece from TC Electronics that sounds fine to me. I'm gonna run it through digitally and squish the hell out of it and end of story. So, you know, so that's what was happening. And so I think there's still a lot of that and probably more of that. But I know, like, you know, some of the newer stuff does sound quite good. Some of the stuff you were talking about you use, it's gotten way better now. So yeah.
The isotopes.
The iZotope stuff is, I think it's really great. I have a couple friends that have it and works well, sounds good. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, even though it's a little bit nostalgic and sad, but we've got the memories and your awesome client base. So everyone knows that you're the top power guy for their mastering for a lot of their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You did like, was it 3 or 4 of their records? Or
Something like that, yeah.
So name a few other local bands people might know,
Local bands, I mean, like,
or well-known
I
names.
worked with like Robin Wilson on a couple of his projects. He had a couple of side projects from, you know, his bigger career previously, and I did a couple of great records for a singer-songwriter named Pete Forbes. They were recorded by Clark Grigsby at Tempe, and they're really great records. They're online, you can find those. There's 2 records, but his name's Pete Forbes, and they're phenomenal sounding records, really good.
Does Clark still have his studio? Do you know?
Yeah, he does, yeah. I did a lot of stuff for ASU, you know, like it'd be student projects or, you know, like the professor projects and stuff like that. You know, we did for years, I did all the Tim and Willie's stuff. I mean, for a long time, I did all the stuff for like a lot of the radio stations that were real big here. Ben and Brian, I think they were on Camel at the time, and Tim and Willie were on KNIX. And then we did like Beth and Bill, you know, before he passed, and like all these local radio stations, we're doing a bunch of their stuff. They do like Christmas compilation things. I did all that stuff, and you know, I mean, on the bigger scale, like I did Sheila E stuff, and you know, for a handful of records, and you know, the Tower Power stuff. And the Tower Power stuff came through Clark. They asked him to mix one of the records because the band leader lives here in town, lives in Scottsdale, Emilio Castillo, who's a great guy, and I got that through Clark, and then that was. Man, I don't remember the year, but the initial project was a live record that Clark recorded. And then Emilio came into my place and we mastered 2 tracks as a demo, and that was on Sony Music at the time. Sony wanted to hear my mastering before they committed to it.
Wow.
So we did 2 tracks and we spent half a day or something like that, and we went to lunch. And just hanging out with Emilio was like kind of like just phenomenal. For me, that was the best, man. It was like so cool. He was really nice, and when we were done, we were going to lunch, and we were sitting in the back of this. Mike Florio was there, and he was driving. He had an SUV, and we're sitting in the back of his truck on to lunch. And Emilio looked at me and said, "Hey, man, you do good work." And to me, that was worth that. When you hear that from like an idol, it's like, I'm done, man. That's just really great. So that was really fun. And then I went on to do a couple more. And unfortunately, that record, they brought it to Sony. They checked it out, and they said, no, we're going to do it here. And then Vlado Miller did it at Sony Studios. He ended up mastering it. So I did all the editing on that one, putting all the tracks together. And with a live performance, you kind of have to figure out how you're going to blend the audience to make it sound natural. Because they're all clips cut up, and you got to feather them all together. But that was fun, and I ended up doing about 3 or 4 more records for them as well. And then I did their 40th anniversary record. One of the heartbreaks is that I never got a credit on that record because all the artwork was already done.
Oh no!
So Emilio called me and he said, "Hey man, I got this record and They did that at Fillmore West up in San Francisco, and all the guys from all over the years came back for that performance. They did like a handful of nights. So unfortunately, when you have all those people on a stage in a live environment, and you have all those mics open, major phase issues potentially, and then like, you know, it just sounded kind of washy.
Yeah.
So he called me and he goes, yeah, it just doesn't sound right to me. And I go, well, what don't you like about it? What's not happening, you know? And he said, you know, he goes, when you get done with our stuff, it sounds cohesive like a record. This doesn't sound that way. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get at him like what, you know, what it is. So he came in and we sat down and I listened to it and I immediately was like, oh boy. So it was just real washy and kind of had this sort of like real covered kind of sound, you know? And it had no dimension and it was just kind of a flat thing, you know? And so I put on the live one, the Clark mix, which was from, I don't know, it was 10 years prior or something in that range. And I A-B'd them and it was like night and day, you know? So I was like, we want to get to that, but we're at this, you know? So he said, okay, I'm going to leave it with you and then let me know. And so that one took some doing to kind of get into it and dig some stuff out, you know?
Wow.
But I got it to a better place, but, you know, but anyway.
Let's get into the weeds.
Yeah, in the end of that one, and no credit, I was like,
Oh, no.
damn it. So
without getting into the dregs of how the magic that you did for something like that, just for the gurus who are kind of not beginners, can you give them a quick 1 minute on what you would do in such an instance?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're going back quite a few years, but I mean, basically with something like that, the biggest issue was the phase kind of thing, because you have too many open mics, you know, too much acoustic, you know, information flying around the room and too many mics. So you can't undo that. You know, there's no way to undo that. Now, it wasn't like it was like out of phase or anything. It wasn't like a phase reverse kind of situation, but it was just too washy and kind of didn't have like a real centralized. So, but it was also real muddy, you know. So I know for that one, a lot of what I did was try to, like, I would typically you're trying to, you know, again, we get back to the loudness wars thing, you know, we talked about. But like you're trying to get as big and robust of a sound as you can out of whatever you're working on. I mean, depending on what you're working on, everything's obviously unique, but competition is generally one of the things that we have to keep in mind. So I'm trying to get it competitive, and I'm, you know, I personally, I like to use references when I usually work on what I'm doing. I would work on what I'm doing, go through it, and then when I feel like I'm in the right place, then use references. That's usually what I do. I don't listen to any references up front.
Oh, nice.
Only on the back end.
That's a new one, folks. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't really want to listen to the reference up front, you know, because I don't want to be thinking like that.
Yes.
I want to be thinking like me.
Gotcha. Wow.
So in a case like that, I know I was dragging a lot of that lower mid funkiness out of there. And the funkiness in a bad way, not a good way, and then I was kind of trying to open up the top end and just getting some more dimension out of it. And again, when you have a live performance with all that data flying around, all that acoustic information, you can't really go too hard in the top end, especially with tower, because it will get too shrill, get too edgy and stuff like that. So, you know, it was mostly trying to uncover that mud, get it more dimensional and a little more deep, you know, EQ, compression, and stuff like that, you know. I had an Avalon AT2077. That was one of my main EQs. I had the TC Electronics M5000T with the mastering module in there. And I had the Manley tube compressor limiter, the mastering version. So those are three of the main pieces that I would use. I had 8 bands of parametric EQ in my Sonic, fur filters, really nice EQs. So anyway, a lot of slicing and dicing to try to get like just the mud off. And I would typically, almost with every project I did, not every one, again, you know, everything's unique, but because you're trying to fill up that, you know, limited space, I would usually start with like a lot of people listen to something and go, oh, that sounds muddy. Let's start adding some top end. In my mind, over the years that I worked in, I start with reduction instead of adding. So I always start, because a lot of times when you start reducing bad things, the good things come out on their own.
Okay.
So instead of like adding, when you start, like you have to think of it, if you're talking about a mix and you start putting all the faders up, eventually you run out of headroom. Everything just starts clipping, gets funky. So eventually you have to kind of finesse things so that you're removing things to give you some headroom. And the best recordings I ever worked on are things that had front and back dimension and musical dynamics. So like Pete's records, as an example, have great dynamics and great front to back dimension. So it's easy to think of a pan pot left and right. You can do this, that's pretty simple, but to do this is a much more complicated issue. So And the best mixers think in those terms. How you're layering stuff. Like I used to teach classes for ASU and MCC and conservatory and stuff like that, and I would always tell like these kids. A lot of times you think like guitar players, especially because we're all knuckleheads. If you have like a Marshall Hastack and you get that sound in the studio, you're like, that sounds great. We want to make a big record. Let's do 4 of those. Well, that's a bad idea because now you're going to have like the frequency peak of the same thing in there. So like I would always if you're talking about you know, rock records, I would play some older ACD or even some newer ACDC stuff. And when you listen to their stuff, everything is loud and punchy, but the arrangements are really sparse and real spread out. So like if you want to listen to just the kick, it's easy to hear. If you want to listen to just the bass guitar, it's easy to hear. Everything has its own pocket, so nothing's being stepped on. There's no like multiple piles of stuff going on that covers up other stuff, So likewise, just like with effects, for instance, like if somebody has a vocal and there's a ton of reverb on it, and it's real wet, and the vocal's out in the front, the whole track's going to sound wet. So it's you have to be selective about what you're doing and sensitive about it. But for the tower thing, it was mostly for that record, the 40th anniversary. It was mostly trying to remove the mud, and I always start with something like that. I know I'm going to have to punch it up eventually and run out of headroom. So I start with removing stuff. It's like, I know there's some dead stuff in here and there's some boxy sounds in here. Let me get rid of some frequencies down here, lower mid-range or wherever I might be. And sometimes you might just roll off something from like 30 cycles on down and see what happens, because sometimes there's a bunch of, space down there that's being used up that, you can use in other places. And sometimes when you start rolling that stuff off, now all of a sudden, now it's starting to sound better already. But everything in my life was like, I had the Manley passive console that I had custom built, and everything's A, B, A, B, A, B. You're always kind of listening, like, where was it, where is it now, kind of thing. So, and that's part of the process is like, it's a little like going to the eye doctor. Is this better or is this better? So that's kind of what you're doing. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's a real masterclass. So, folks, over the past number of minutes, we've been talking mastering, and this is just the very beginning. We got a lot more. So stay around, stay tuned, and we'll continue the conversation.